I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a Dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening.
Hello, welcome.
Hi.
Today we have Aranja with us, who does a whole host of stuff in the direction of mostly coaching, is that right?
Yeah, coaching, counseling.
Okay. And where does the range go from? Well, I guess the thing is that I'm in Berlin this time because I wanted to go to this thing that came into my inbox called the Death Festival. And you were one of the speakers. And you really stood out to me because of this range of offerings that you provide, that you have, including engagement on death, but also kink. But actually, there's a whole host of stuff. Like, what else is there in the coaching toolbox?
Yeah, a couple of things, as you already mentioned. Thanks for having me, by the way.
No.
I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. Yeah, being with me, sharing with us.
I mean, I like being asked about my stuff, so I can go on. But so I do psychological and systemic coaching and counseling. I do trauma therapy. I do kink coaching, which I define a little bit as either supporting beginners in finding the ways to navigate kink that's best for them, but also seeing how to maybe deepen kink if you're already kinky, how to deepen it in the sense that how to use it for personal development. I think we like to play with our trauma. That is something fun as well. So a space to touch upon that. I'm a death doula and do a lot of grief work as well. And I work with psychedelics. Yeah, so that's the basket.
Range.
Yeah.
Love. And how did you start to come to these parts? Like, when did you start to understand that these were things that were interesting to you? I guess there's a lot there. Maybe we can start with one.
I mean, I do feel like they kind of relate. It's all like the dark, the taboo, the Plutonian kind of themes. I think it probably started with, death and kink. I think death has always fascinated me ever since I was a kid. I would pick up dead animals and sometimes I'd, throw like a little funeral for them and like bury them. And I spent a lot of my early years living opposite a crematorium associated with a temple. And so there was a lot of, that kind of going on. It wasn't something that was scary. And then kink, as for most of us, it starts at an early age, and it was the same for me. I didn't pursue it until much later, but it was always kind of there. And so, I think it started with death and kink. And I think as I went on, sort of into adult life, family members passed away. I was a full-time caregiver to my father before he died. And that experience prompted me a couple of years later to become a death doula. And so that's where I got into the whole death and grief stuff. The psychedelics, that probably started when I, when I came to Berlin. Because, it is the land of plenty, where that's concerned, the city of sin. And in my 20s, I kind of discovered more of that. But the good thing was that I discovered substances probably a little later than most. And so I think I had a different approach. And I think I was very quick to adopt psychedelics or drugs in general as something that are supportive to mental health. So
maybe that's been your approach in general, though. Rather than maybe it seems like, yes, you grew up around maybe death, ritual, an understanding of that there might be a kink within you, but it also already sounds like that it's about an engagement of care rather than just hedonism, which is also fine.
I mean, I enjoyed that part too, don't get me wrong.
But that it was there also, I guess, was maybe why it kind of came to the facilitator role, perhaps. Yeah. And when did you start to sort of move, like how does one think to become a death doula, or where does one pick up that concept? I only heard of it, I would say, maybe my mid-20s, and I didn't really understand how that sort of surfaced. It was more of a friend of a friend who was doing a course to become one. Like, how did you understand that that was a role? Where did you hear of it?
That's a good question. I think I came across death doula work before I had words for it. When my dad was dying, he had a death doula. It was a really lovely older man, same age as my dad, who was not actually a death doula. Was actually somebody who ran a sort of almost like a, I wouldn't call it a meetup, but like he would visit people who had cancer, and something grew from that. And of course, when people have cancer, a lot of them die. So I think by default, he became a bit of a death doula. And I contacted him because I just wanted some support for my dad while he was navigating cancer and grief around it. And that's where I found this person. And he was so lovely, such depth of character, gentle. And I was like, wow, this is like, I noticed how it helped my dad. I noticed how it helped me as a caregiver. And I was like, you know what, if I'm not really scared of death, if that's not something I'm scared to touch or be around, maybe I have a responsibility also to, share that and be there for other people, because it was just so valuable at such a vulnerable time to have that support.
Yeah. And how many jobs or clients have you worked with since making that sort of a decision? Or how has that journey been as somebody building a repertoire around it?
So I'm not a paid death doula. I don't do this as paid work. Because in Germany where I am, this is volunteer work. And, while I could probably try to set up a business around it, and I think I prefer to do it as a volunteer.
Yeah. So people do get paid for this work?
They do, usually not within Germany. That's not a thing. I think if you need support with grief, that is more something people pay for. But like if you do kind of hospice work, that's generally something done by volunteers. They tend to be of a certain demographic, usually older women who have the time and financial resources to give.
Why is that not is it palliative care? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, palliative care is more something, doctors would do.
Oh, okay.
And so what I do as a volunteer, I don't do any medical stuff at all. Yeah. It's more just like spending time with people.
Yeah, but it's interesting that they don't have like psychological space within that as an inherent function.
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit. I think some people I think doctors will like suggest you see, a psychologist, psychiatrist if you're displaying like lots of symptoms of depression. So that does happen. Hospices will have kind of, art therapists and stuff and support there. But again, it is bound within a system, and in the system, it just depends. Are there enough resources for things like this, et cetera, et cetera? And dying people don't tend to be at the top of the list of,
people we can continue to utilize, so therefore invest in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The reality of that. Yeah. Okay. And do you ever bring these different aspects together in like a singular sort of job? Is there ever a scenario where that can happen? Have you ever seen that happen?
I have not brought together everything. I'm tempted though. But I have brought together some things, and yeah, I think psychedelic experiences for me are very much infused with experiences of something death-like. I mean, I've never died, so what do I know? But something that feels like death, like ego death, that you can experience with a psychedelic experience like that. But that's kind of where those two merge. I think kink and death, not so much yet. I'm really excited about psychedelics and kink. I know that's kind of a gray area in terms of being there, consenting, and being able to like hold your limits under the influence. But then again, we experience other kinds of high, and it still works. And so I think at certain dosages with certain substances, I think that would be interesting.
I think that's a very interesting thought in general, because I mean, we have all of these systems that have been created amongst the community, the kink community, over a few generations now, that have really helped in terms of understanding consent and proliferating that as a basis, and understanding ourselves and negotiation, and understanding people in general. I think it's all been very helpful, but at the same time, it does also feel like it's really clamped down on this space of, okay, yeah, but what is delving into our psyche for? So it's good that we have all of these frameworks, but the whole point of going into that part of ourselves that was not necessarily welcomed was to smash those walls. And now we're building up some again. Not to say that I think, obviously, these frameworks are not helpful and useful on a definite everyday level, but that there could be some space for a little bit more not really knowing. Yeah. But of course, that comes with a danger. Yeah. So maybe it's about negotiating the potential for those spaces. To be like, it's just going to be potentially crazy.
But I think you touch on a really important point. It is that space of uncertainty and of not knowing, and I think that's perhaps something that does unify certainly psychedelics, themes of death. Obviously, we don't know what happens after, if anything, and certainly in kink as well as in sort of, I think, therapeutic spaces, you also don't necessarily know exactly what will happen in a session. And I mean, you can plan it out to the T, but I mean, how much fun is that? So
some people like that. But predicting the reactions and the little movements that you're getting from somebody is not necessarily possible. But I kind of feel like there is a great intersection between kink and death, actually. To me, similar to how you link psychedelics and death. I think that there is not only maybe the possibility within a power dynamic, but also in how you surrender to desire or proclivity. I think that there is a great ego death that's possible also through kink, and that it's just more like transformation, right? Yeah, I think that just letting go, I think, sometimes brings the most magic. And whether it's the desire of kink or just being pushed there by being in the right headspace, I think that happens also fairly commonly. Yeah, when we're letting ourselves be in that space. So not only maybe is it about the connection of the taboo, but I think there is a lot of transformation sort of in all of these different aspects that you've been up to, which is nice.
Yeah, there's also, you mentioned letting go, and I think that's certainly one aspect. And another one that is, I think, related is a form of humility in the face of things that are bigger than you. I think this may apply to things like psychedelics and death a little more than kink, perhaps, because that you can kind of negotiate. But even there, I think there is a kind of humility and respect for the process and for what's going to happen, for what's going to unfold, what can happen between two people or more. So there's something about not always being like this big on, egoic kind of being in that space the whole time.
The flow, the potential of life. But you are speaking at the Death Festival in the coming days. Do you know much about the festival in general, or?
I believe it's the first time it's being hosted in Berlin, at least. So I've never been. I have no idea. I'm kind of excited.
Topic?
So my topic is cultural practices in death and grief and what they can teach us. And it's about kind of, there's a couple of unifying factors that cultures across the world kind of employ to support this process after someone's passed away and the grief. And these are things that, are very general. There's generally like a place to grieve, or there's time allocated that is more than 3 days, it's months on end. There are rituals. So there's all these principles that we employ, and that I think we would do well to get back in touch with, back in their original form, in their length, in order to process deaths and grief more effectively. And I think what's happening is that in many Western cultures, there's been a loss of some of those traditions. It's not that they didn't exist, but something's been lost. Things are moving quicker. There's less tolerance for the slowness and the diminishment that comes with engaging with death and grief. And when we I think experience the loss of that, and there's a power imbalance between sort of Western cultures and other cultures, what can happen is that that aspect of cultural appropriation, we go and we just kind of cherry pick the things, let's just like celebrate Day of the Dead, and and you're like, are you even remotely Mexican? And I'm not saying that cultures, we need to hoard like our cultures and like not share them, and only the people who belong can practice them. But there is something about, I think, being mindful of the power imbalance between sort of Western cultures and the way in which we might, help ourselves to the buffet of different cultures' practices. And I think instead of doing that, can we reconnect to the principles that underlie and that we actually have in common, and either create new traditions or get back in touch with lost traditions.
And what are some of the principles that you found are helpful within the process of death and grief? Like, you talk a little bit about duration and how maybe things are too contracted. Like, how much time do you like to spend with people, or how much time do you keep checking in with people, or the people who surround them? Like, or are there certain ways that you engage through your work that are standard or that are necessary? Or is it always different?
Every person I accompany as a death doula, it's very different. But in terms of the principles, I think we would do well to make the process a bit slower in general. There is no need, for instance, once someone has passed away, to immediately call someone to have the body taken away if they're at home, or even at the hospital. You don't need to call someone immediately. This is sacred time. You can spend that time with your loved one I mean, they're dead. What's going to happen? They're not going to get any deader. So, you might as well just, give yourself those few minutes also to let your body and your nervous system adjust to the fact that this person is now gone. In a lot of traditions, you keep people at home for a couple of days at least, sometimes longer, until, all the family has come from afar. And so you really have that time to be around the body. I think that also helps. I think especially children, young people see that death is kind of a normal thing. Grandpa's just hanging out here, and it's not a big deal. And so that's one of the things I would say. Just slow it down, give it more time.
Are there laws around whether the body can remain in a space?
I think, in Germany, I think there are.
There's laws for everything.
I mean, don't quote me on it. I don't have that much to do with it because I'm not an undertaker. And I'm generally not there at the moment of death. So there are restrictions. You can't keep a body at home for months on end. But I think there is more wiggle room than people would know. And I think it's good to know these things in advance. Because in the moment when your loved one passes and you're like, what do you do? What do I do now? And to know, okay, this is where death doulas are really helpful because they're like, okay, just slow it down. Let's just sit, just have some tea, let it settle, open a window.
Yeah, it was the first time that I saw a body in that state was my grandmother, and I was 4. And she was with us in the house for 10 days. And it was interesting to form this, I don't know if you would call it a relationship or just this relation to her transition, I guess. And my family called me in just a few moments after she had died. She had cancer and it was very quick and she had care, but within 3 months, that was that. And she passed in our house and she was on her side of the bed and they were like blocking up her ears and her nose because that people bleed out of their ears and their nose after they pass, I think. And I remember just sitting there with her. Yeah. And then also just like a lot of sitting around with her for those 10 days too. And I realized exactly what you said. It's just like a normalization of things. And I've had like maybe one sort of crisis where I've understood my existence ending, maybe in my mid-20s or something like this, just awake all night one night. But apart from that, it's always, I think, been very tempered by my early experiences with how everybody sort of handled everything with such grace. And like fullness. There was a lot of sadness. There was a lot of everything, and a lot of togetherness around it. And I think that has made far less intimidating and taboo, compared to how I see some people recoil at the thought. Yeah. So I hardly actually hear of other people getting to have that experience, which is really a shame, actually.
Yeah. There's this big taboo around children as well. Don't let children see.
Do you think people would think that's a weird story, like in general? People don't normally tell me that's a weird story when I tell stories.
I mean, you mean about your grandma?
Yeah.
You're talking to a death doula, so I'm probably not the best person to ask because I'm like, no, it's a great story.
Would average people think that's strange? Maybe.
I think if you whoop it out in the middle of something unrelated, then maybe it's strange. But like, if there's a hook, if it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess maybe I realize it's not normalized and therefore it's a little bit too stand out, perhaps. But then says the dominatrix. Oh, but if you were to combine the kink and the death and the psychedelics, what would that look like? Maybe like a retreat with somebody towards the end of their life. maybe?
Certainly, if that's what they're into. I mean, if there's a kinky person who wants to experience some shit before they go and they're into psychedelics and they're kinky.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's a retreat and a half.
Like, go out with a bang. Sign me up.
Yeah, could you imagine a group who would be like that? That would be an incredible feeling. Like,
you'd also have to get the timing right, though, right? Because you'd have to bring people together in the right, like, yeah, you know, who know it's the end is nigh, but who are still in the right physical condition to be able to enjoy it still.
Do you need to be in a certain physical condition to enjoy psychedelics or kink?
I think it's more that for the person, they would need to know what state they need to be in order to enjoy it.
Okay.
I mean, I think, well, as illness progresses and the more time you spend unconscious, it's going to be harder to engage in anything that requires any amount of energy. So there's that factor.
True. And how did you, I mean, you talked about coming here and coming to psychedelics and understanding and how maybe your care side integrated with that. But where do people, when using psychedelics in a context like you are interested in, what are they normally moving towards? Like, what would a case study sort of look like?
In terms of somebody who would be interested in psychedelics and kink?
No, just psychedelics, coaching in general.
So in terms of psychedelics specifically, I do preparation and integration because the middle bit is not allowed here. So, and in terms of integrating, I think people will come in after kind of a challenging experience or one that's left them going, what was that about? They feel the need to integrate it or to let it settle, to have it find some application in their lives. In terms of preparation, I feel like either I'm not doing a good job because a lot of people, you know, who come to me saying, oh, I'd like to do psychedelics. I'm like, well, like, why? And what are your expectations? And what are you outsourcing to the substance that you're not willing or able to do yourself? And those are the questions I ask. And a lot of people find, they're like, actually, yeah, maybe I don't need that. Or maybe I need something else.
I think that's very good, no?
Yeah, but
You want
I guess
them to
I'm not
take the
really,
thing.
no, I don't. I have no agenda, but I'm like, you know, I guess I just didn't do substances a favor by, you know, diminishing their client base. But substances probably also just don't care.
I don't. So I kind of have this thought. Obviously, it's like a personal thought, but I hit meditation pretty hard. Like, I don't know, maybe it'd be 12 years ago now. And I probably hit it harder than I should have. I can be pretty intense about stuff. And it completely, what I thought set me off kilter for a couple of years, I now realize that it was about a reintegration. It just had to happen sort of in a way that looked quite confusing. But that whole process made me realize I didn't really have support, you know. It kind of made me realize that you can put your body through stuff, but your mind's not going to be ready for it. And kind of having them meet is going to be really hard if those two are too far apart. So is that kind of what you mean by like maybe or maybe that's kind of what I hear when you're talking about these very smart questions that you're asking these people before they place this very powerful thing in their lives, because it will bring up a lot of confrontation and the integration is going to be really difficult. if, I guess, those things are not at least thought of. So I think that it's a success that they are understanding that maybe they're not in the space for it.
Or to go in with different expectations. It does.
Yeah. What are people expecting?
A magic bullet very often. I mean, not all of them. I think the more experience people have with substances, the less they have that expectation. It's more people who are new to it. But the thing is, it's the people who are new to it that would seek out a practitioner who has experience.
Oh, okay.
More so, at least that's been my experience. It's just, sample of one.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, you're not going to see, I guess, the ones who are just like taking it.
I mean, I get those too.
Okay.
But they are outnumbered by newbies, which I think it's great. If you don't know something, something, get an expert to tell you about it.
Yeah.
Do. Yeah. But yeah, it's those people that I think have the expectation that this will. It's kind of the hack to your mental health, and yeah.
Whereas, how would you describe psychedelics, if not a hack to your mental health?
I think it shakes up your system a little bit like a snow globe and leaves the bits to settle in other ways. That's not to say that they won't still settle in the same pathways, but at least when you've shaken it up, they have the chance to settle in other places. And I think that's the beauty of integration. It helps the bits settle in places that you might want them rather than the habitual paths.
Beautiful. Yeah. And when you're consulting, is it usually for like one-off experiences, or is it more useful to do things over prolonged periods of time, or can it always look quite different?
I would say when it's about preparation, either people will have like 1 or 2 sessions with me and then decide, okay, maybe it's not the magic bullet I thought, and then reconsider. And so the preparation sessions, they tend to not be as drawn out or long. Sometimes I have longer ones. But in terms of integration, I think that's when it gets more, I wouldn't say more interesting, but certainly it takes more time. And I think that's good. I think as with, all things death related as well, I like it when it's slow. And I think people who come to me for counseling appreciate that. I'm not like a 10-step fast track, get this done.
And would you say you bring a similar approach to the kink coaching also?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, with kink coaching, especially if it's the one, for newbies, that will take longer and it will touch on other issues, often like attachment styles or, shame around what you like, what you don't like. So it brings up a lot of childhood stuff as well. So it's not just, hey, what am I into? Let's, do some impact, do some rope, go find a play partner. So it takes more time.
And is it a lot of newbies that are normally coming?
I wouldn't say a lot. The newbies I have are usually, my partner is into it. I don't know how to deal with it. Like, should I do this? And I think what I really appreciate with clients like that is, I appreciate that they want to support their partner, but often because they are not in touch with what they want just yet, it can be tempting to go with what your partner wants, perhaps sometimes at the expense of what you want, without assessing if it's really for you. And I know some things you only find out once you've tried them. But it's good to have a little bit of a foundation, a little solidity in what you are and what you want before you go trying to please someone else. Or, going with somebody
It takes investigation. People don't love to do that.
I mean, what's been your experience with this investigation bit?
I guess my main thing when I think of a scenario like that is that I won't say that I'm established in everything that I am and want and feel and need, but it comes across that way to people, it seems. So maybe I'm a little bit more so than maybe the average person. But that has often put me in this position, like you've mentioned in a way, where I do end up, especially because of the power dynamic that I tend to gravitate towards, a lot of people pleaser, sort of like, and not necessarily aware and just looking for a leader, you know? And it's been an interesting and hard road to understand that even when people say that they are interested in submission, service, being available, being there for you, being what you need and want, and however, that that might not necessarily be the case, and that there are other factors that I maybe need to think of, and or they need to be responsible for their own journey also. And so to not necessarily take it on when they maybe suddenly realize that it's not what they wanted all along. I don't know. I've tried over the years to figure out the telltale signs that make like somebody happy within themselves, you know, and happy to be there in the position that they are presenting themselves in. But it's I don't know. It's not 100% reliable. Is that right? Okay, good.
It's not. I don't think it is. I mean, there's also something to be said for giving people the space to find out. I mean, we're allowed to make mistakes.
Yeah.
We don't have to, run to a coach so they can, support us in never making a single mistake. But I feel like there's some things you don't need to find out the hard way. Not necessary.
Yeah. I guess maybe it's just happened a few too many times, and maybe too recently, that I'm kind of feeling like so now in the dating bios, I write that like people would ideally also have their mind and their life in a space that they're very happy with. Even though I enjoy power dynamics with me in a dominant position and you in a service, that I want to meet an equal. Yeah. And so I think maybe that has been good. But it does mean that you don't meet as many people. But that's good. That's fine.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah. But it did take a while for me to get to that place that you really need people to be just really within themselves. Yeah. In order to start to toy with the edges of power. And that's not a small ask. Yeah.
For sure.
If you were to coach somebody who was very along in their kink journey, or have you, what has that looked like?
I get newbies more than I get experienced people. I think experienced kinksters come to me for things that are often like not super related to kink, but because they can talk to me freely about, their kinky relationships without it being like a kink thing that they want to talk about. But when it does happen, it's often about that fine line between kink and trauma. Well, there's no line, but just I think the interconnectedness of those two. How healthy is it for me to play with this? I don't know if the partner I'm playing with is healthy. Is this good for me? Am I developing some kind of dependency? Basically, how is this impacting my life outside as well? And yeah, it's messy. I think the deeper we get into our traumas when we play, I mean, it's intense. It's fun, and harbors a lot of potential, I think, for harm as well as for healing. And I think people who come to me for that specifically, they usually start with trying to make sure that it's not harmful. They're not sure about it. And then we might go into, well, how can we, or how can you structure your engagement in kink in a way that you would feel is actually supportive to healing, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah. How, say somebody wanted to engage with a specific trauma more in their play, like how would you go about helping them navigate that?
It really depends. I think because in trauma therapy, we don't advise going into original traumas. It's like, don't put yourself back in the situation when you're 5 and something terrible happened. We may or may not feel drawn to do that in kink. That's a different thing. But from I think, trauma therapy perspective, that is generally not advised.
Because?
Because it can throw you out of your so-called window of tolerance. If you want to work on integrating the trauma that happened, what you want to do is you want to be in a state mentally and in terms of your nervous system where you can still manage what is coming up. It's at the edge of what feels uncomfortable, but you can still manage to integrate it, to use your somatic techniques, to expand your ability to be with it, so that you're not immediately just dissociating or in fight or flight. And I think that's where it gets interesting with kink, because I think in some ways we are really, really present, but in some ways we're also very much not. We're in some kind of sub or top space. There may be some dissociating. I think there's a fine line between these mental states, and I think as long as there is still an ability to be there, to be present, and to notice what's happening in your body, and not just riding off that high and going, ooh, that's nice. I think there's a lot of room to integrate what there was, even with reenactment. Although I would not advise going and, doing a reenactment of your worst trauma and trying to fix it that way. The recommendation is more to go step by step in small increments with things that are at the edge of what you might be able to tolerate, but can still manage, and to go from there. So I don't know if that...
I would love to see a action plan. I actually have somebody in mind that maybe I will talk to you about after. It's a very complex process. But sometimes I do have people with very specific trauma who get in touch and not necessarily want to exactly reenact, because maybe who the perpetrator was may have been male and I'm female. You said it's there's a little bit of reconfiguration there, but I always treat them differently, for better or worse, than my usual booking process. I'll end up doing calls with them before, which I don't necessarily do, and try to ask whether they have psychological support systems around them. I'm probably a little bit more tender normally, unless I've known them for a very long while, and then I know that space doesn't necessarily need it. But, or I can trust that it will be interpreted correctly enough. But yeah, I guess it would be interesting to maybe read more literature around how best to potentially engage. Yeah, it's because as I mean, even as a personal practitioner, right? Professional, personal. I guess I just have maybe more touch points, but people are still touching it all the time, even in their personal lives. How to do that with the potential best outcomes for all the pieces potentially involved. Is there literature around kink and trauma that you've come up with, or
there is some? I know of a German language resource. I'm trying to think English. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot around in terms of people in the kink scene who have their own experiences and maybe have a therapeutic sort of professional background. I think there are writings on FetLife and stuff by those kinds of people. I've known one or two people giving sort of workshops on sort of kink and trauma, but I think considering how large the overlap is between kink and trauma, there is very little out there in terms of formalized things. It's a lot of anecdotal. This is how I see it. This is how I would do it. This has been my experience with clients.
Do you think that's for a reason? I guess maybe some academics don't want to associate that necessarily openly with themselves, or maybe it's just such a taboo area. Yeah.
I think so. I think it's just, the whole...
Let's engage with trauma directly.
Yeah, and kink. I mean, it's also so sensitive because of this widespread idea that, anyone who's kinky is mentally unhealthy.
Have they got rid of that yet?
Yeah. So, and I think to then go, oh, kink and trauma, it's like, oh, yeah, the crazies. See, they're definitely crazy. And I think it's just, you have to be careful.
What are your thoughts around people's hesitancy around, the edges of emotion, like the harder emotions, maybe be grief, or the things to engage with, like death, or because I kind of feel like kink has really been my sort of vehicle for getting comfortable with the edges of where my human experience can go, like how I can lean into rage, maybe, as long as I'm, like you said, watchful, or like fear, or bringing that into a scene, and like how we mitigate that in order to integrate. I feel like it's been very useful for me to get comfortable with the fact that I'm alive in a lot of ways. Yeah. What was my initial question? I was just remembering all these wonderful moments. What were we talking about?
I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you what was going through my mind in terms of a response. And I think what kink does is create a container where we can experience these things. Because I think you were talking about like why we struggle to maybe confront death and be with our harder emotions.
What do you think is so like scary or difficult or taboo about giving those spaces space?
I think we deal better with things that we feel equipped to deal with.
Yeah.
And kink, by providing a container and providing so much sort of negotiation and preparation beforehand, and knowing there's going to be something afterwards, and knowing this is a special situation, we can be other people if we want to be, or aspects of ourselves. It's a much more safe feeling container to let things out. Whereas in daily life, we might not feel like we have that. If someone, gets a terminal diagnosis, we've never had that experience before. What do? We're left with all these feelings. We haven't been taught to be with them. There's no container for them, really. And so I think in those situations, we're not thrilled to talk about death and be around grief, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we'd be more willing if we felt more able to, if there were more spaces, more skills imparted.
And what are the skills that are lacking? perhaps. I think there's a lot of fear that's instilled also in like, just don't look. Yeah. Just keep to a format. I think people are almost canceled off of their curiosity, for whatever reason. But well done on sustaining yours and turning it into a whole thing.
Oh, it's just a trauma response. I'm just kidding. But no, but it is an interesting question. I think there are many things in society now that are eroding our ability to be with these feelings. I think it's a mixture of sometimes just skills like emotional regulation skills, co-regulation skills, so regulating with other people, self-regulation skills. But I think also, how connected we feel to others, how much of a sense of community we have. Do we think people have our back? We're not going to engage in anything risky if we feel like we can't fall and reasonably recover from it. And so if that risk becomes too high, we'll avoid it.
So many things. Are these things that are mostly coming through the training for the trauma-informed therapies, or what has your training been?
My training has been, there's been a lot. And the thing is, I've done courses, I've got certifications, and with none of those, with one or two exceptions, do I really have the feeling that that's the thing that really taught me what I learned. I think most of what I've learned has been through experience and through applying what I read and having very brave clients who are my guinea pigs. I do credit teachers, but yeah, I think in trauma therapy, that was probably the one course that was actually useful to me, that I felt made an impact.
It sounds like it. Yeah, with a lot of the frameworks that you are sort of clarifying. Sounds like something that's been a really useful thread. Yeah.
For sure.
Amazing. Well, I hope that you have a wonderful time ahead at the Death Festival. And thank you for bringing in all the experience into the offerings that you have. And is there anything else that maybe has kind of come to mind during our time together that you would like to share?
I think I'm leaving with the thought of seeing how I can combine those aspects even more. To do a big ass psychedelic death kink trauma retreat. I do tarot as well. Maybe we can weasel that in there.
Oh yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, I once did a little sacrificial sort of ceremony. Yes, I mean, that's touching on death. I mean,
lamb to the slaughter. I like it.
Was it in a church? I won't tell you. But yeah, I really look forward to that retreat.
But you'll be the first on my list.
Thank you. I think it's definitely going to be something I'm completely serious, for me to think about towards the end of my life. I mean, we always never know what will happen, right? But if there's ever a time that I know when that might come, or if I get to enough of an age, I think it'd be interesting for me to sort of celebrate death in a way. I don't really see that happening, but I think there's something necessary to it. Yeah, but we'll see. I'll call you.
Please do.
So thank you for listening. Speak to you next time.